In the beginning, long before sailors whispered Poseidon's name in prayer, long before temples rose along the coasts, and long before the sound of waves became a symbol of both peace and fear, the sea was silent. It was endless, dark, and waiting. It had no god, no ruler, no voice to command its restless tides. But destiny was already weaving its threads, and within the vast tapestry of creation, a child was about to be born who would carry the weight of the oceans in his very soul. Poseidon was not born into peace. His story, like so many of the Olympians, began with struggle, shadows, and fear. He was the son of Cronus and Rhea, two of the great Titans. Cronus, paranoid and consumed by the prophecy that one of his children would overthrow him, swallowed each newborn the moment they entered the world. One by one, his children disappeared into his cavernous stomach, devoured, silenced, stolen away from life before they could even cry out. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, all swallowed. And then came Poseidon. Rhea, trembling with grief and despair, held him for only a brief instant before Cronus's massive hand reached out, and the child was taken. Without mercy, the Titan consumed him, and Poseidon fell into the darkness inside his father. There, in that terrible prison, the young god lay suspended in time, unborn and yet alive, aware but unable to act. His siblings were there too, shadows of divine sparks hidden away, waiting for the moment of release. For years, perhaps centuries, though time had no meaning in that place, Poseidon remained trapped. He was cradled in darkness, his existence reduced to a quiet hum within the belly of Cronus. Yet even then his essence spoke to him. Even in silence, Poseidon could feel the call of something vast, something untamed. He felt the pull of water, the endless stretch of waves, the pulse of hidden depths. Though he did not yet know his destiny, he belonged to the sea before he had even seen it. Meanwhile, the world outside continued to shift. Rhea, desperate to save at least one of her children, gave birth to her youngest, Zeus, in secret on the island of Crete. She tricked Cronus with a stone wrapped in swaddling cloths, and the Titan swallowed it without suspicion. Zeus grew in hiding, nurtured by nymphs and protected by the Curetes, until at last he was strong enough to challenge his father. The day of liberation came suddenly. With the aid of the goddess Metis, Zeus devised a cunning plan. He prepared a potion that would force Cronus to disgorge what he had consumed. Disguised as a servant, Zeus brought the potion to Cronus, who drank without suspecting. Then it began. A great pain gripped the Titan, and he roared, clutching his stomach. His body convulsed, and from within him emerged the children he had stolen. First Hestia, then Demeter, then Hera, then Hades, and finally Poseidon. For the first time, Poseidon opened his eyes to the world. He inhaled the air of freedom and felt the raw light of existence. After years of imprisonment in darkness, he emerged as if reborn, his spirit already forged by silence and waiting. He stood beside his brothers and sisters, no longer a prisoner, but a god ready to claim his place in destiny. And so began the great rebellion, the Titanomachy. The war between the Titans and the Olympians was unlike anything the cosmos had ever known. For 10 years, thunder shook the skies, the earth cracked open, and the seas boiled with fury. Poseidon fought alongside Zeus and Hades, his strength growing with each battle. He wielded no weapon at first, only raw power and courage, but the tide of war was heavy, and the Olympians struggled. It was then that Zeus, in his wisdom, descended into the depths of Tartarus and freed the Cyclopes, the one-eyed masters of the forge. Grateful for their release, the Cyclopes forged 3 weapons of unimaginable power for the 3 brothers. To Zeus they gave the thunderbolt, a weapon of light and fire capable of splitting mountains and shaking the heavens. To Hades they gave the helm of invisibility, a crown of shadows that could cloak him from all eyes. And to Poseidon they gave the trident. It was no ordinary spear. The trident shimmered with the essence of the oceans, its 3 prongs glimmering like stars reflected in dark water. With it, Poseidon could stir storms, summon earthquakes, and command the tides themselves. The moment it touched his hand, he felt whole. It was as though the sea itself flowed into his veins, and with each movement he could feel the pulse of the deep. The trident was not just a weapon. It was an extension of who he was meant to be. With their weapons, the brothers turned the tide of war. Poseidon's trident shook the foundations of the earth. He struck the seas, and walls of water rose to swallow the strongholds of the Titans. He struck the ground, and earthquakes shattered mountains. The very elements bent to his will, and his enemies trembled before him. At last, after 10 long years, the Olympians emerged victorious. Cronus and the Titans were defeated, cast down into Tartarus, chained forever in the depths of the underworld. The old order was broken, and a new age began. Now came the division of the cosmos. The 3 brothers stood together and drew lots to decide who would rule which realm. Zeus drew the heavens to rule the skies and the storms. Hades drew the underworld to govern the land of the dead. And Poseidon drew the sea. It was no ordinary prize. The sea was vast, mysterious, and infinite. It was both giver of life and bringer of death. It was calm and nurturing, yet violent and merciless. It was a realm that touched all things surrounding the earth, connecting every shore, reaching into every horizon. And now it belonged to Poseidon. As he stood upon the shore for the first time, trident in hand, Poseidon felt the sea answer him. The waves rose in greeting, the winds hushed, and the deep roared with recognition. He stepped into the waters, and they parted around him, embracing him as their master. In that moment, Poseidon was no longer just one of the gods, he was the sea god, the eternal ruler of the oceans. Imagine the sight: the vast horizon stretching endlessly, the waves glittering under the light of Helios, the salty wind carrying whispers of power. Beneath the surface, unseen creatures stirred, leviathans, serpents, and beings older than time. And Poseidon, with his trident glowing faintly in the sun, stood as their lord. The sea was no longer silent. It had found its voice, and its voice was Poseidon. The sea, once untamed and voiceless, had found its sovereign. But Poseidon, though crowned by fate, did not yet know the full extent of his dominion. His brothers had claimed their thrones with clarity, Zeus upon Olympus, master of the skies, and Hades beneath the earth, keeper of the underworld. Poseidon's kingdom, however, was not yet shaped. It stretched endlessly, unfathomably, an eternal expanse that demanded order. So the god of the sea descended into the depths. He walked across the shoreline, his trident shimmering with each step, the waves licking at his feet as if eager to follow. The deeper he went, the quieter the world became. The roar of waves faded, replaced by a muffled silence, the heartbeat of the deep. Light dimmed, colors blurred, and shadows thickened, until Poseidon stood in the realm few had ever seen. There, in the heart of the ocean, he planted his trident into the seabed. The earth shook, and from the depths rose a palace unlike any other, a vast citadel of coral and pearl, shimmering with iridescent colors that caught what little sunlight filtered down. Its walls were translucent, alive with the soft glow of bioluminescent creatures. Towers spiraled upward like conch shells, and arches curved like waves frozen in motion. Schools of fish darted between its columns as if recognizing their new lord. This was Igi, Poseidon's palace. From here he would reign, not in solitude but surrounded by the endless pulse of the ocean. Every current became his messenger. Every tide obeyed his will. Every storm carried his breath. The sea was no longer chaos. It was kingdom. Poseidon seated himself upon a throne of obsidian and shell, polished smooth by centuries of water's caress. The trident rested at his side, glowing faintly in the dim light. He closed his eyes and he listened. The ocean spoke. He heard the distant rumble of waves striking cliffs, the whisper of streams flowing into rivers, the soft sigh of tides pulling upon shores. He heard whales singing in the far reaches, dolphins leaping in play, and creatures so ancient their voices sounded like thunder in a dream. It was overwhelming at first, a cacophony of movement, a symphony of life. But slowly, like a musician tuning his instrument, Poseidon learned to weave it all into harmony. Where there was chaos, he brought rhythm. Where there was silence, he brought breath. Where there was fear, he brought awe. In those early days, Poseidon did not sit idle upon his throne. He shaped the waters, molded the creatures, and set boundaries for his realm. He raised islands from the depths, striking the sea floor with his trident so that land would rise where none had been before. Some islands were small, nothing more than lonely rocks kissed by gulls. Others were vast, fertile, and destined to cradle civilizations. He called forth rivers to flow into the sea, carving paths across the land, giving mortals water to drink and valleys to farm. Each river was given a spirit, a guardian, so that its flow would never cease. He stirred the great whirlpools, places of mystery and terror, to remind mortals of the sea's dangers. He sculpted coastlines with his storms, their cliffs jagged, their beaches smooth, all shaped by his unseen hand. And he filled the oceans with life. Leviathans of enormous size swam through his depths, their shadows larger than ships. Serpents coiled in trenches deeper than mountains are tall. Fish of every color swarmed the reefs, dazzling as living jewels. And in the darkest reaches, where light could never go, Poseidon breathed life into creatures of strangeness and wonder, glowing faintly like stars scattered across the black. But the sea was not only his playground, it was his temple. Each wave was an offering, each storm a hymn. Poseidon's power was not for himself alone but for the balance of the world. As the sea grew under his rule, Poseidon began to watch the mortals who lived upon the earth. They were fragile, wandering creatures, clinging to the soil, fearful of the unknown. Yet they could not resist the call of the sea. From their earliest days they built rafts and boats, venturing out upon the waters in search of fish, trade, and discovery. Many perished, swallowed by storms or dragged beneath by unseen hands. But some survived, and their songs began to include Poseidon's name. They carved small shrines by the shore, offerings of wine, bread, and salt left for the unseen god of the waves. They prayed for calm seas, for safe journeys, for fish to fill their nets. And sometimes Poseidon listened. He stilled the winds, guided the currents, and allowed their journeys to succeed. But other times, when their arrogance angered him, he sent storms to remind them that the sea was not theirs to command. Poseidon was not cruel, but he was not gentle either. He was balanced, unpredictable, vast, beyond mortal control. He gave and he took, blessing and punishing with the same hand. Within his palace, Poseidon was not alone. Soon he was surrounded by nymphs, spirits of the waters who sang to him in voices like flowing streams. They danced through his halls, weaving garlands of seaweed, their laughter echoing like bubbles rising to the surface. Some tended to his throne, polishing its black sheen until it gleamed. Others guided schools of fish through the coral towers, keeping the palace alive with motion. Among them was Amphitrite, a sea goddess of great beauty and dignity. She was of the Nereids, daughters of Nereus the old man of the sea, wise and eternal. Amphitrite's hair flowed like currents, her eyes glimmered like pearls, and her presence calmed even the most violent storm. Poseidon's gaze fell upon her, and his heart, often wild as the waves, grew steady. At first Amphitrite resisted him. She was shy of his temper, wary of his passion, for Poseidon was not known for patience. Yet he pursued her with devotion, sending gifts, shaping waves into melodies, and calling upon dolphins to carry his pleas. In time Amphitrite's heart softened, and she became his queen. Together they ruled the oceans, their partnership both tempestuous and tender. From their union came children who embodied the sea's mysteries. Among them Triton, the merman with a conch shell whose blast could still storms or summon them anew. Triton swam beside his father, a herald of the sea, carrying the voice of Poseidon to distant shores. Half his dominion was the sea. Poseidon's power did not end at the shore. His trident struck not only waves but earth itself. When anger burned in his chest, he slammed it against the ground, and the earth trembled. Mountains cracked, cities fell, and mortals cried out in terror. For this reason, Poseidon became known not only as the Lord of the Seas but also as the Earth Shaker. His storms could swallow ships, but his quakes could swallow entire kingdoms. No temple, no city wall, no fortress of stone could resist him if he chose to unleash his wrath. Mortals, fearing his temper, raised temples to him not only by the sea but deep inland. They begged him to hold the earth steady beneath their feet. And Poseidon, though unpredictable, heard their prayers. Sometimes he granted them peace, other times he shook their foundations to remind them of his power. Poseidon was no longer a child freed from darkness. He was no longer merely one of the Olympians. He had grown into his full nature, vast, mighty, unrelenting. From his palace beneath the waves, with Amphitrite at his side and the trident in his hand, he reigned over an empire no other god could touch. And yet, his story was only beginning. His passions, his rivalries, his loves, and his wrath would shape not only the sea but the fate of mortals and gods alike. The waves rolled endlessly across the shores of the earth, and in each one Poseidon's name echoed, eternal as the sea itself. The ocean is vast, but the reach of a god is vaster still. Poseidon's name spread quickly, carried by the winds and the waves, whispered in ports, sung in fishermen's chants, and carved into the first temples that rose along the coastlines of Greece. Mortals feared him, yet they also admired him, for he embodied something they could never escape, the sea itself. But fear and admiration are close companions, and it was not long before Poseidon's temper became legendary. Where Zeus ruled with thunder and law, Poseidon ruled with storms and silence. Where Hades governed the stillness of the underworld, Poseidon governed chaos in motion. His power was not simply felt, it was lived, breathed, endured by every sailor who dared set his vessel upon the rolling waves. And mortals learned, slowly but surely, that Poseidon was not a god to be taken lightly. One of the earliest stories of Poseidon's rivalry began in a land of promise. a rocky peninsula surrounded by sea, where mortals dreamed of building a city to honor the gods. The people gathered, uncertain of whom to dedicate their new city to, and they called upon the gods to decide. Two came forward, Athena, goddess of wisdom, and Poseidon, lord of the sea. They stood before the people upon a rocky hill that would later be known as the Acropolis. Poseidon stepped forward first, his trident gleaming in the sun. With a single strike upon the earth, he split the rock, and from the fissure gushed a fountain. Water roared forth, shimmering in the light, powerful and unending. The people gasped in awe, for such a gift promised strength, protection, and might. But when they tasted the water, their expressions soured. It was salty as the sea itself. It was not water to drink, not water to nourish crops, but water of storms and waves. Athena then approached, her eyes calm, her hands steady. She bent to the earth and planted a single seed. From that seed grew an olive tree, its leaves silver, its trunk sturdy, its fruit abundant. The people touched the olives, smelled the oil, and saw in Athena's gift food, light, and prosperity. The choice was clear. They chose Athena. The city became Athens, forever linked to wisdom rather than waves. Poseidon's pride was wounded. He struck the earth again, sending tremors through the land, his rage echoing in the sea that surrounded the city. Yet he did not destroy Athens. His fury simmered, but even in his anger there was respect. He had been bested not by force but by wisdom, and deep in his heart he knew there was honor in that. Still, the rivalry between Poseidon and Athena endured for ages, a reminder that even gods could compete and even gods could lose. Poseidon's temper was not always restrained. Many mortals would come to know his wrath. Once, a king named Minos prayed to Poseidon for a sign of his right to rule Crete. Poseidon, answering the prayer, sent forth from the sea a magnificent bull, white as snow and strong as the mountains. The bull was to be sacrificed in the god's honor, a gift returned to its source. But Minos, dazzled by the creature's beauty, kept it for himself and offered another in its place. Poseidon's fury was swift. He cursed the bull, filling it with madness so that it rampaged across the land. Worse still, he cursed Minos's household with a fate that would bring shame and suffering, for betrayal of the sea god was not easily forgiven. In another tale, when the Trojans failed to honor him after he had helped build their city walls, Poseidon sent a monstrous sea serpent to ravage their shores, a beast so large that its coils could encircle entire ships. Mortals cried out, and temples were raised in haste, but Poseidon's lesson had been delivered. To take his gifts lightly was to invite disaster. The sea was not kind. The sea was not cruel. The sea was Poseidon, unpredictable, eternal, merciless in its balance. Yet it would be unjust to think of Poseidon as only wrathful. He also bestowed gifts that shaped civilizations. From his hand came the first horses, magnificent creatures born of sea foam, swift as the wind and powerful as waves. He taught men to tame them, to ride them across fields and into battle. Horses became companions of kings, symbols of power, and they carried Poseidon's spirit in every gallop. Some say he created the very first horse, Scyphios, striking the earth with his trident and calling the beast forth. Others say he crafted an entire herd, a gift to humanity to remind them that strength and beauty could be harnessed, but never truly owned. For this reason, Poseidon was not only the god of the sea but also the tamer of horses. Temples to him often bore carvings of galloping steeds, and sacrifices of horses were made in his honor, their hooves echoing like waves crashing upon the shore. He also gifted islands, shaping coastlines for favored mortals. He raised Delos from the depths, providing a sanctuary for Leto to give birth to Apollo and Artemis. He blessed certain fishermen with abundant catches, guiding schools of fish into their nets. And to sailors who honored him faithfully, he gave calm seas and steady winds. Poseidon was as generous as he was wrathful. But his generosity, like his fury, was unpredictable. As centuries passed, Poseidon's kingdom deepened. His palace at Aegae became the heart of the ocean, but his presence stretched far beyond it. He was felt in the tranquil lapping of waves upon a quiet shore, in the thunderous roar of storms crashing against cliffs, in the slow, steady rhythm of tides that pulled upon the earth and moon alike. The creatures of the deep revered him as their father. The Nereids danced in his honor, their songs weaving currents into patterns. The dolphins leaped joyfully at his command, guiding ships to safe harbors. Even the monstrous beings, the serpents, the krakens, the leviathans, bent their terrible heads in submission. To mortals the sea was mystery. To Poseidon it was clarity. Every drop of water, every grain of sand upon the seabed, every gust of salt air belonged to him. And yet he never sought to control it completely. He let the sea remain wild, for wildness was its truth. He merely guided it, stirred it, and listened to its eternal song. And in that song, Poseidon heard everything: the cries of sailors lost, the laughter of children playing upon the shore, the prayers whispered at temples, the rage of storms, the silence of still waters. He was the sea and the sea was him. The stories of Poseidon had only begun to spread, stories of his contests, his gifts, his wrath, and his endless dominion. Mortals would continue to build their lives by the sea, daring its dangers, embracing its gifts, fearing its storms. And Poseidon, ever watchful, ever vast, would remain both protector and destroyer. The trident gleamed in his hand. The waves rolled endlessly. And in the depths the sea god smiled, knowing that his reign had only just begun. Poseidon's name had become a current flowing through the hearts of mortals and gods alike. From the high peaks of Olympus to the lowliest fishing village, from the deep trenches of the sea to the far-off islands kissed by sun and storm, his presence was undeniable. He was not merely one of the three brothers who divided the cosmos. He was a power unto himself, a voice as constant as the tide. Yet even among the gods, Poseidon's dominion inspired awe. On Olympus, Zeus ruled with authority, his thunderbolts cracking the heavens. Hades kept to his shadowed realm, silent and distant. Poseidon, though often dwelling beneath the waves, came to Olympus when the council of gods was summoned. His arrival was always dramatic. The sound of waves crashing echoed in the halls, the scent of salt water filled the air, and his trident gleamed as if it carried the very light of the sea. The other gods regarded him with a mixture of respect and caution. They knew his temper, knew that his storms could scatter fleets and his quakes could level cities. Yet they also knew his loyalty. In the wars of gods, Poseidon stood beside his kin, striking with his trident, summoning waves to sweep away enemies, shaking the ground beneath their feet. He was not a god who schemed quietly like Hermes, nor one who planned with careful wisdom like Athena. Poseidon's nature was direct, vast, unyielding, impossible to ignore. When he spoke, his voice rolled like distant thunder across the sea, slow and deliberate, yet carrying an authority none could deny. To mortals, Poseidon was both savior and destroyer. He was the god they prayed to before setting sail, pouring wine into the waves as an offering, whispering names of loved ones they hoped to see again. He was the god they cursed when storms dashed their ships against rocks, when whirlpools swallowed their vessels whole, when earthquakes toppled their homes. Yet even their curses were prayers of a kind, for mortals knew that Poseidon's hand touched every aspect of their lives. They raised temples to him in port cities, carved statues of him holding the trident, his beard flowing like the sea, his gaze stern but watchful. Horses were sacrificed in his honor, their hooves echoing like the pounding surf, their sacrifice a reminder of his dual power, lord of waves, tamer of steeds. In Sparta, Corinth, and countless other cities his cult grew. Fishermen, sailors, traders, kings, all bent the knee to the god of the sea. They called him by many names: Earth Shaker, Wave Rider, Lord of the Deep, Tamer of Horses. Each name captured a fragment of his nature, but none could contain the whole. Poseidon was a paradox, giver of life, bringer of death. To some, he was the gentle god who guided their boats safely to harbor, who filled their nets with fish, who gave them horses swift as the wind. To others, he was the vengeful god who unleashed storms without warning, who cracked the earth beneath their feet, who sent serpents from the deep to punish their pride. This duality was not cruelty but truth. For the sea itself is both calm and violent, both nurturing and destructive. Poseidon embodied the essence of the ocean, its endless beauty, its boundless terror, its mystery and majesty. To love the sea was to love Poseidon. To fear the sea was to fear him as well. And mortals in their fragile lives did both. Though Poseidon's passions were many and his temper fierce, his bond with Amphitrite endured. She tempered his storms, soothed his rages, and stood beside him as queen of the deep. Their palace at Aegae thrummed with life, a place where gods, spirits, and creatures of the ocean mingled freely. Their son Triton grew swiftly, his conch shell echoing across the waves. He swam beside his father, carrying messages, calming seas, or rousing them with a single blast. Triton became a symbol of Poseidon's might, a living extension of his father's will. And beyond Triton, Poseidon fathered countless children, some divine, some mortal, some monstrous. Each bore some mark of the sea: strength, unpredictability, beauty, or rage. Through them, his influence spread not only across waters but into every corner of mortal legend. With his trident, Poseidon summoned storms that rattled the bones of the earth. These were not punishments only but demonstrations, reminders to gods and men alike that his dominion was not to be forgotten. Wind screamed across the waves. Lightning tore the skies, though it was Zeus's domain, for Poseidon's power stirred even the heavens when his rage was great. Ships splintered like driftwood, their cries lost beneath the roar of the sea. Whole coastlines changed in a night, reshaped by his hand. But when the storm passed, calm followed. The same sea that devoured ships gave forth abundance once more. Fish leapt in silver arcs, waves glimmered under sunlight, and mortals whispered his name with renewed awe. For such was Poseidon's way: destruction and renewal, wrath and gift, silence and roar. Though the Titanomachy had ended, and though the thrones of the three brothers were established, Poseidon often reflected upon that moment when the cosmos was divided. He remembered drawing his lot and receiving the sea, not sky, not underworld, but the ever-moving waters. At times he envied Zeus's rule of the heavens, where stars glittered like eternal jewels. At times he wondered about Hades's silent dominion over the souls of mortals. But in the end he always returned to the truth: the sea was his and there was no greater kingdom. For unlike sky or underworld, the sea touched everything. Rivers ran to him, rain fell into him, tides pulled upon him. Mortals depended upon him for food, for travel, for trade, for life itself. And beyond mortals, every creature of the ocean, from smallest fish to mightiest leviathan, lived under his gaze. It was not only a kingdom, it was the heartbeat of the world. And so, Poseidon rose from the shadow of his birth, from the darkness of Cronus's belly, from the chaos of the Titanomachy, to become more than a brother of Zeus and Hades. He became himself, the god of the sea, the shaker of the earth, the eternal wave upon which mortals' fates would ride. The palace at Aegae gleamed beneath the waves, its walls glowing with living light. Amphitrite's voice sang in the halls, Triton's conch echoed in the depths, and the trident pulsed with power at Poseidon's side. The ocean moved endlessly, ceaselessly, a mirror of its master. Above, mortals prayed and feared. Below, creatures bowed and sang. And in the heart of it all, Poseidon sat upon his throne, vast as the ocean, eternal as the tide. The first chapter of his reign had closed. But the sea is endless, and so too are its stories. The sea is never still. Even when the surface lies calm, glassy beneath the moonlight, currents stir in its depths, unseen but powerful. So too was the heart of Poseidon, restless, shifting, never bound to a single shore or a single passion. Though he ruled with majesty from his palace at Aegae, Poseidon's story was not told only in waves and earthquakes. It was also written in his loves, in his rivalries, and in the bonds he wove with both immortals and mortals. His heart, like the ocean, was vast, and within it dwelled tempests and still waters alike. Among all the unions of Poseidon, none was more enduring, none more defining, than his bond with Amphitrite. She was not merely a consort but a counterpart, the calm that tempered his fury, the depth that matched his vastness. Amphitrite was one of the Nereids, daughters of the old sea god Nereus and the Oceanid Doris. She was born of salt and tide, her hair glimmering like flowing kelp, her skin glowing with the pallor of moonlit waves. Her eyes, deep and steady, carried the peace of the sea in its gentlest moods. When Poseidon first beheld her, he was struck not by desire alone but by recognition. Here at last was one who mirrored the ocean not in rage or storm but in quiet, endless being. He pursued her as waves pursue the shore, but Amphitrite, cautious and shy, fled from his advances. She hid among the daughters of Oceanus, seeking shelter from the god whose temper was as famous as his power. Poseidon, and used to denial, felt the sting of her absence. Yet rather than grow violent, he turned to patience. He sent emissaries into the seas, dolphins who swam tirelessly to plead his cause. One dolphin, noble and faithful, spoke gently to Amphitrite of Poseidon's sincerity, of his longing not merely for possession but for companionship. The dolphin's words softened her heart, and she returned with him to Poseidon's side. Their marriage was celebrated in the depths, with feasts of coral and pearl, with songs sung by whales and choirs of nymphs. Poseidon crowned Amphitrite his queen, and in her presence, his storms grew gentler, his palace warmer. To honor the dolphin who had united them, Poseidon placed it among the stars, creating the constellation Delphinus, eternal in the night sky. Together, Poseidon and Amphitrite bore children who carried the essence of the sea. Foremost among them was Triton, half man and half fish, his conch shell a herald of storms. When Triton blew upon it, the sea calmed or raged at his father's command. Other daughters, lesser known, carried Amphitrite's gentleness into the waves, watching over creatures of coral and kelp. This union was not without storms. Poseidon's passions often strayed, and Amphitrite's patience was tested. Yet through all trials their bond endured, as steady as the tide, as vast as the ocean. For though Amphitrite ruled at his side, Poseidon's desires could not be contained. Like the sea that touches every shore, his passions reached far and wide. He loved goddesses and mortals, nymphs and queens, and from these unions sprang heroes, monsters, and legends. Each love bore a tale. Some were tender, fleeting as a gentle wave upon the sand. Others were fierce, crashing like storms upon cliffs. And some brought sorrow, for Poseidon's will was not always gentle, and his pursuit could be as relentless as the tide. One such tale was that of Demeter, goddess of grain and harvest. Poseidon desired her, but Demeter, wishing to escape his advances, transformed herself into a mare and fled across the plains. Yet Poseidon, relentless, changed himself into a stallion and pursued her. From their union came Arion, a wondrous horse swift as the wind, who bore the mark of divinity in his immortal speed. This story, unsettling to mortal ears, reflected Poseidon's dual nature, relentless in desire, but also the giver of gifts. For Arion became a symbol of nobility, a steed beyond compare, forever tied to the name of Poseidon. Another tale spoke of Medusa, once a maiden of beauty who caught Poseidon's eye. Within the temple of Athena he embraced her, an act that brought Athena's wrath upon Medusa rather than upon him. Cursed, Medusa was transformed into the Gorgon, her hair a nest of serpents, her gaze turning men to stone. From her eventual death sprang two of Poseidon's children, Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, the warrior of golden blade. Even in tragedy, Poseidon's legacy endured, carried upon the wings of Pegasus, who soared into legend. So the loves of Poseidon were not always stories of joy. They were stories of creation, of consequence, of beauty mingled with sorrow, like the sea itself, which offers bounty and storm in the same breath. If Poseidon's loves tied him to the mortal world, his rivalries tied him to the divine. He was a brother of Zeus and Hades, an ally in their rebellion, but he was not one to bow quietly to another's rule. His pride was vast and his temper fierce. With Athena, his rivalry was legendary, born from the contest for Athens. Though he lost the city, the sting of that defeat never faded. Their quarrel echoed across ages, manifesting in small contests, subtle slights, and unspoken tension whenever they stood together upon Olympus. With Apollo, his rivalry was of another kind. Once, when Zeus punished Apollo by sending him to serve a mortal king, Poseidon was also bound to labor beside him. Together they built the walls of Troy, stone by stone, with divine hands. But when the Trojans failed to pay them justly, Poseidon's fury burned hotter than Apollo's. From then on, their paths often crossed in conflict, for Apollo's light and Poseidon's sea were powers that clashed as often as they complemented. Even with Zeus there were times of strife. Though the brothers shared power, Poseidon's temper sometimes flared against the king of the gods. Once, in anger at Zeus's rule, Poseidon joined Hera and Athena in a plot to overthrow him. But their rebellion failed, and Zeus's wrath was terrible. Poseidon was humbled, yet never broken, for the sea cannot be chained forever. Poseidon's rivalries extended not only to gods but also to mortals. Kings and heroes often found themselves at odds with him, for his favor was as fleeting as the tide. When Odysseus blinded Polyphemus, the Cyclops son of Poseidon, the sea god's fury pursued him across 10 long years. Every storm that struck his ship, every delay that kept him from Ithaca, bore Poseidon's hand. It was not until Odysseus endured endless trials that Poseidon relented, allowing the weary hero to return home. In other tales, Poseidon aided mortals, granting Theseus strength, guiding Jason's ship upon the Argo, blessing certain sailors with calm seas. Yet his aid was never free, never predictable. To earn Poseidon's favor was to walk a narrow path, honoring him with sincerity, never forgetting that his wrath was as close as his mercy. Thus, Poseidon's loves and rivalries painted a portrait of a god as complex as the sea. He was husband and father, yet restless in passion. He was ally and brother, yet fierce in rivalry. He was benefactor and destroyer, worshipped and feared in equal measure. In his depths lay tenderness and fury, creation and destruction, calm and tempest. His loves brought forth heroes and monsters alike. His rivalries reshaped cities and stories. His name rolled like thunder across the waves, whispered in prayers, cursed in storms, praised in calm seas. And so the tale of Poseidon deepened, carrying with it the endless ebb and flow of his nature. The ocean is vast, and in its depths lie creatures both wondrous and terrible. So too were the offspring of Poseidon, born of unions both gentle and stormy. Some walked as heroes upon the earth, others soared upon the winds, and still others haunted the shadows of the sea. To speak of Poseidon's children is to wander through the tides of myth itself, for each bore his mark, each reflected some fragment of his nature. Foremost among Poseidon's children was Triton, son of Amphitrite. Half man, half fish, he embodied the duality of the sea, part known, part unknowable. His upper body bore the strength of a god, broad and commanding, while his lower half shimmered with scales, ending in a powerful tail. Triton dwelled in his father's palace, but his voice carried far beyond those coral walls. With a great conch shell, he summoned the seas to calm or rage. Sailors whispered of him, telling tales of a god who could still a storm with a single breath into his horn, or whip the waves into chaos with another. In art, Triton was sometimes shown multiplying, one figure becoming many, as though the sea itself was filled with countless Tritons, each echoing the other. This reflected the truth of his nature. The sea has many voices but one spirit. He was Poseidon's messenger, his herald, his extension into the waters of the world. Among the most wondrous of Poseidon's offspring was Pegasus, born from the blood of Medusa after Perseus struck her down. From tragedy came beauty, a horse with wings vast and white, shining with divine light, capable of carrying heroes across the heavens. Pegasus was more than a beast. He was freedom incarnate, the very breath of the wind over the sea. Poseidon, as lord of horses, claimed him as his child, a gift from sorrow. The winged steed became companion to the hero Bellerophon, who rode him against the Chimera. Yet Pegasus, untamed by mortals, returned in time to Olympus, where he carried Zeus's thunderbolts, serving as a bridge between the sea, the sky, and the storm. Here we see Poseidon's duality. In one story he brings forth the terror of Medusa, yet from that terror springs Pegasus, a symbol of grace and divine power. His children carried not only his strength but also his contradictions. Not all of Poseidon's children shone with light. Among the darkest was Polyphemus, a cyclops who lived upon a lonely island. He was vast, towering over men, with a single eye blazing from his forehead. Though some cyclopes were smiths and servants of Zeus, Polyphemus was solitary, dwelling in a cave where he herded sheep. It was Polyphemus whom Odysseus blinded after being trapped in his cave. The cries of the wounded Cyclops reached his father Poseidon, and from that moment, the sea god's wrath pursued Odysseus endlessly. Storm after storm rose against him, waves hurled his ships back, and the calm he longed for always slipped beyond reach. Through Polyphemus, we see how Poseidon's paternity extended not only to noble creatures but also to forces of chaos and destruction. The sea is not only pearl and dolphin, it is also whirlpool and shark. Among Poseidon's mortal children was Theseus, hero of Athens. Though stories vary, many told that Aethra, his mother, conceived him through Poseidon's embrace upon the shores of Treason. Theseus grew to embody courage and cunning, slaying bandits and monsters, uniting Attica under Athens and journeying into Crete to face the Minotaur. When he sailed to Crete, it was Poseidon's bull that stood at the heart of the labyrinth. Some say that the very creature Theseus faced was a punishment of Poseidon against King Minos, who had failed to sacrifice a sacred bull to the sea god. Thus, even in the hero's greatest trial, Poseidon's hand was present, both as father and as challenger. Theseus was a bridge between God and man, a reminder that Poseidon's blood flowed not only in the oceans but also in mortal veins. His heroism was vast, but his fate was tragic, as so many of Poseidon's children's lives were. From Poseidon's pursuit of Demeter came Arion, the swift horse who carried the mark of divinity. Unlike Pegasus, who soared in the skies, Arion's hooves thundered upon the earth. His speed was unmatched, his mane flowing like waves in motion. Some said he could speak with a human voice, others that he never tired, never stumbled, never faltered. Arion became the steed of heroes, carrying Adrastus in the War of the Seven against Thebes. Through him, Poseidon's power stretched across the plains, showing that his dominion was not limited to sea and storm but also touched the herds of horses, creatures forever linked to his name. The list of Poseidon's children stretches endlessly, as wide as the sea itself. He fathered giants and kings, nymphs and monsters, each one bearing some spark of his might. Some brought glory to mortals, others brought terror. Each reflected an aspect of his vast being, the calm that nurtures, the storm that destroys, the mystery that lies between. From his unions came rulers like Atlas's descendants, tied to the weight of the heavens. From his passions came beings like Chrysaor, born with a golden blade, a figure of war and splendor. From the depths came nameless sea nymphs, gentle presences who comforted sailors in times of need. The ocean gives without number, so too did Poseidon's legacy spread without end. His children were the waves of his nature, crashing upon the shores of myth. As Poseidon's children roamed the world, his rivalries with gods only deepened. The contest with Athena over Athens remained bitter. Poseidon had struck the ground with his trident, bringing forth a salt spring, a gift of the sea. But Athena offered the olive tree, symbol of peace, fruit, and prosperity. The Athenians chose her gift, and the city bore her name. To Poseidon this was no small insult. He had offered the power of the waves, the might of the sea. Yet they had chosen the quiet strength of the olive. In his bitterness, Poseidon often sent storms against Athenian shores, testing their resilience, reminding them of the power they had denied. Still, the Athenians honored him, for even rejected gods must be appeased. Temples rose to him along the coasts, and sacrifices of bulls and horses sought to calm his wrath. With Apollo the quarrels never ceased. At Delphi, the oracle's seat was a place Poseidon had once claimed, before Apollo drove him away. Though Apollo ruled it thereafter, Poseidon's name lingered in whispers, for the earth-shaking god never surrendered his claim entirely. Even with Hera, Poseidon clashed, for the queen of Olympus was not always pleased with his tempests or his wandering passions. And with Zeus himself, the struggles of pride sometimes threatened to fracture Olympus. Yet through it all Poseidon endured, for the sea cannot be banished, only endured. In this part of the tale, Poseidon stands revealed not only as lord of waves but as father of countless beings, his children walking the earth, flying the skies and haunting the seas. His rivalries, ancient and unending, shaped the fate of cities and heroes. His loves bore wonders and terrors alike. To understand Poseidon is to understand that creation and destruction are one, that the sea feeds and devours, that love and rivalry are bound in the same tide. He was not a god of half measures. In all things he was vast, relentless, inescapable. And so the story flows onward into deeper waters, where his name was invoked by sailors, kings and heroes alike, and where his storms shook the destinies of mortals and gods. If Poseidon's loves brought forth children who changed the world, his rivalries carved storms into the lives of mortals and gods alike. His was not a quiet reign. His heart, restless as the sea itself, never allowed peace for long. And so his story cannot be told without recounting the conflicts that rippled from his trident, touching empires, kingdoms, and lone travelers upon the waves. No rivalry between a god and a mortal is as famous as that of Poseidon and Odysseus, king of Ithaca. When the Greeks had taken Troy, the winds carried many heroes home swiftly. But Odysseus, cunning and bold, found himself ensnared in Poseidon's storms. Why? Because he had blinded Polyphemus, the Cyclops, who was none other than Poseidon's son. The tale begins on a barren island, where Odysseus and his men stumbled upon a cave filled with cheeses, milk, and sheep. Believing the owner absent, they lingered, feasting on what they found. But the cave belonged to Polyphemus, who soon returned, his single eye glaring with fury. He blocked the cave with a massive stone and devoured Odysseus's men two at a time. The hero, trapped, devised a cunning plan. He gave Polyphemus strong wine, enough to dull even a giant's strength. When the Cyclops asked his name, Odysseus answered, "Call me nobody." As Polyphemus slept in a drunken stupor, Odysseus and his men drove a sharpened stake into his eye, blinding him. The Cyclops roared, calling to his kin that nobody had harmed him, and so none came to help. The next morning, Odysseus and his men clung to the undersides of sheep and escaped as the blind giant let them out to pasture. But as Odysseus sailed away, pride overcame him. He shouted his true name to Polyphemus, boasting of his deed. That was his undoing. For Polyphemus stretched out his arms to the heavens and prayed, "Father Poseidon, hear me. Grant that Odysseus never reach his home, or if fate demands he return, let it be late, in pain, with all his men lost, to find his house in ruin." Poseidon heard. And from that moment the sea turned against Odysseus. Waves hurled his ships back, tempests struck him down, and every island became a new trial. For 10 years he wandered, never knowing peace, until at last Athena interceded, and the long war of wills ended. Through Odysseus, we glimpse the nature of Poseidon's anger, vast, relentless, and patient. The sea does not forget an insult, and neither does its god. Another mortal entangled in Poseidon's wrath was Minos, king of Crete. When Minos sought to prove his right to rule, he prayed to Poseidon for a sign. From the depths of the sea, a magnificent bull arose, shining with divine majesty. Minos was meant to sacrifice the bull back to Poseidon, honoring the gift. But the king, enamored with its beauty, kept it for himself and sacrificed a lesser beast instead. Poseidon's fury was swift. He struck the bull with madness and it rampaged across the island. Worse still, he cursed Minos's queen, Pasiphae, to fall in love with the bull. From their unnatural union came the Minotaur, a creature half man, half beast, dwelling in the labyrinth built by Daedalus. Thus, from Minos's arrogance and betrayal of the sea god, terror was born. The Minotaur became both curse and burden, demanding Athenian youths and sacrifice until Theseus slew him. Yet behind the hero's victory lay Poseidon's anger, for had Minos honored the god, the labyrinth and its beast would never have existed. The city of Troy, later famed for its fall, was once touched by Poseidon's own labor. In its early days, Poseidon and Apollo, punished by Zeus to serve a mortal, worked for King Laomedon. Together they built the walls of Troy, strong and shining, meant to withstand any assault. But when their work was done, Laomedon betrayed them, refusing the promised payment. In vengeance, Poseidon sent a sea monster to ravage the coasts of Troy. To appease the god, Laomedon was forced to sacrifice his daughter Hesione, binding her to the rocks as prey for the beast. Her fate might have been sealed, had not Heracles arrived and slain the monster. Yet the tale remained as proof. To defy Poseidon was to invite ruin, even upon a city he had once helped build. The most enduring divine rivalry of Poseidon was with Athena, goddess of wisdom. Their contest for the city of Athens shaped the destiny of Greece. When the gods sought to claim cities as their own, Poseidon struck the earth with his trident, and from the rock burst a salt spring, a symbol of the sea's power. Some say he gave a horse instead, the first ever seen by men, embodying speed, strength, and battle. Athena in turn planted the olive tree. Its branches offered shade, its fruit gave nourishment, and its oil burned in lamps, providing light through the night. The people judged Athena's gift greater, for it brought peace and prosperity, not just war and storm. Thus the city was named Athens, not Poseidonia. Though he lost, Poseidon never forgave the slight. Often he lashed Athenian shores with tempests, punishing their choice. Yet even the Athenians honored him, for to deny Poseidon entirely would be folly. They built shrines to him, and at the Erechtheion upon the Acropolis, both the mark of his trident and the olive of Athena were shown together, a reminder that rivalry can never erase reverence. Poseidon's quarrels were not only with mortals. He once dared rise against Zeus himself. Alongside Hera and Apollo, he plotted rebellion, seeking to overthrow the king of the gods. Together they bound Zeus with chains. Yet Thetis summoned Briareus, the hundred-handed giant, who freed Zeus and turned the tide. For his punishment, Poseidon was cast down to labor among mortals. It was then that he and Apollo built Troy's walls, humbled yet still powerful. Even this failed rebellion shows Poseidon's nature. Unwilling to bend entirely, even before the thunderbolt of Zeus. The sea may serve the sky, but it always seeks to rise against it. In these tales, Poseidon's rivalries stretch across gods and men alike. He curses kings, topples heroes, and lashes cities with his wrath. Yet even in anger, he leaves behind myths that shape the world. The wanderings of Odysseus, the labyrinth of the Minotaur, the fate of Troy, and the rivalry that defined Athens. The sea, after all, is not only calm and beauty. It is also storm, betrayal, and vengeance. Poseidon, as its lord, was the embodiment of that truth. And still, his tale flows onward into Part 4, where we shall see not only his anger but also his enduring legacy, how he shaped the faith of mortals, the prayers of sailors, and the very heartbeat of the ancient world. The stories of Poseidon's passions and conflicts ripple through time like endless waves upon the shore. Yet the truest measure of a god is not only in his deeds, but in the reverence of those who knelt, prayed, and sang to him. To understand Poseidon fully, we must drift now into the mortal world, into temples carved from stone, into prayers whispered upon storm-tossed decks, into festivals where the sea god was honored with offerings of horses, bulls, and wine. The Greeks built their lives in sight of the water. The sea was their highway and their danger, their provider and their destroyer. To them, Poseidon was not distant, not abstract. He was the swell beneath their ships, the roar in the caves along the coast, the foam upon the rocks. Temples to Poseidon often stood at the edges of cliffs, gazing out to the horizon. Among the most famous was the temple at Saunion, where marble columns still rise against the sky. There, sailors stopped before voyages, offering sacrifices to secure safe passage. At sunset, the sea below turned gold and the columns caught the same light, as if both sea and stone were joined in worship. At Corinth, at Isthmia, Poseidon was honored with grand festivals. Every 2 years the Isthmian Games celebrated his power. Athletes competed in running, wrestling, and horse racing, for horses were dear to the god who gave them first to mankind. The cries of the crowd, the pounding of hooves, and the salt breeze from the nearby sea made the games a living hymn to the god of tridents and tides. Though Poseidon was lord of the sea, he was also remembered as the creator of horses. Some myths say he struck the earth with his trident and the first horse leapt forth, snorting and wild. Others say he shaped them from sea foam, their manes flowing like waves. This gift tied Poseidon not only to the ocean but to the land. Kings prayed to him for victory in chariot races and in war. When armies charged, the dust of hooves was as much Poseidon's fury as the crash of surf against cliffs. Yet even here lay his duality. The horse, symbol of speed and grace, also symbolized untamed chaos. To honor Poseidon, the Greeks sometimes drowned horses in the sea, a dark and solemn sacrifice, acknowledging that beauty and death were twin gifts of the god. Not all prayers came from kings or heroes. The simplest offerings often came from fishermen, who depended upon the sea for daily bread. At dawn, before casting their nets, they poured libations of wine into the surf, murmuring Poseidon's name. They left garlands of flowers upon the rocks or small figurines carved from wood. Their prayers were not grand, but they were steady as the tides themselves. In these whispers, we glimpse a gentler side of Poseidon, not the wrathful stormbringer, but the quiet guardian of those who lived humbly by his waters. For though he was capable of rage, he was also capable of sustaining, of feeding, of granting calm seas for safe return. He sea God's will was not only felt in storms but also in prophecy. At Delphi, Apollo's temple became the most famous, yet there were whispers that before Apollo the site belonged to Poseidon. Some believed his voice still lingered in the earth there, a low rumble beneath the more fiery tones of Apollo's oracle. Sailors who consulted oracles often brought questions of Poseidon. Would the winds favor them? Would storms rise? Would the journey bring wealth or ruin? The answers were shrouded in mystery, but always Poseidon's presence was felt as an unseen current pulling at the edges of fate. The Greeks saw Poseidon in two lights just as they saw the sea. To some, he was Poseidon Asphalios, the giver of safety, the firm foundation. To others he was Poseidon Enosigaios, the earth-shaker, whose quakes split mountains and sank cities. In this duality lay his truth. Life itself rests upon balance, and to worship Poseidon was to honor both calm and chaos. The ancients did not pray to strip away his storms. They prayed for understanding, for respect, for survival within his vast dominion. For they knew, the sea will never be tamed, only acknowledged, only endured, only loved in its fury as much as in its peace. Everywhere in Greece, the trident was a sign of Poseidon's reach. On coins, temples, and ships, it appeared as both weapon and blessing. Sailors painted it upon their prows. Kings stamped it upon their seals. Even farmers invoked it, striking their plows into the soil with words of thanks, for water was life, whether from rain, river, or sea. And always, behind the symbol, there was the sense of vastness. For the trident was not only a tool of battle. It was a reminder that Poseidon ruled the spaces no walls could contain, the oceans that encircled the earth, endless and eternal. As the day closed, as fires burned low in the hearts of fishermen and kings alike, the sea spoke with its eternal voice. Waves lapped gently or roared with fury, but always their rhythm echoed the heart of Poseidon. Children fell asleep to the lull of surf. Sailors dreamed of home as the ship rocked upon the current. Priests kept vigil, listening to the waves for omens. And somewhere, deep beneath, Poseidon himself was imagined upon a coral throne, his hair flowing like kelp, his eyes vast as the horizon, his trident resting lightly in his hand. For the Greeks he was never far. To dream of the sea was to dream of him. To fear the storm was to fear his anger. To survive the voyage was to feel his mercy. And so ends the tale of Poseidon's loves and rivalries. He was a god of passion, desire, and vengeance. His unions gave rise to heroes and kings. His wrath birthed curses and monsters. He lost cities and gained seas. He struck bargains with mortals and punished betrayals with cruelty. But beyond love and rivalry, beyond storm and gift, Poseidon remained one truth, the embodiment of the sea. And just as no sailor can escape the pull of the tide, so no story of Greece can escape the shadow of the trident. The sea god waits still in the silence between waves, in the tremor of the earth, in the salt upon the wind. His story flows ever onward, and in the next chapter we will dive deeper still, into his eternal kingdom beneath the waves, into the palaces of coral and pearl, into the mysteries of the ocean that only the Lord of the deep may know. The sea has always been a mirror for human imagination. Its surface glitters like glass beneath the sun, but beneath that skin lies an endless, unknowable depth. For the Greeks, those depths were not empty. They were alive, shimmering with gods, spirits, and creatures beyond number. At the heart of it all was Poseidon, seated upon his coral throne, lord of the silent world that stretched farther than any horizon. Imagine, if you will, leaving behind the shore. The sand fades beneath your feet, replaced by shifting currents. Light breaks into shards as the water deepens. Fish dart like sparks through the blue. The surface above ripples like a memory. Down, down, deeper still, where sunlight thins and the silence grows heavy. Here, in the twilight zone of the ocean, lies Poseidon's dominion. Not chaos as mortals might imagine, but an ordered kingdom, vast and eternal. Coral forests rise like towers. Caves open into wide halls, their walls draped in seaweed like banners. Pearls glow softly, illuminating chambers carved by tide and time. It is not a mortal palace of marble and stone, but a living world, shifting with every current, singing with the voice of the sea. At the center stands Poseidon's palace, a wonder few could even dream. Homer spoke of it in hushed words, a golden palace beneath the waves, gleaming with eternal light. The foundations are coral, crimson and white, interwoven with seashells polished by eternity. Pillars rise from black stone quarried from the ocean floor, encrusted with jewels, emeralds glowing like sea grass, sapphires as deep as midnight waters. The roof is formed of a single massive shell, its inner surface gleaming with mother of pearl, shimmering in hues of pink, green, and silver. It reflects the flickering light of phosphorescent creatures drifting through the water, so that the palace seems alive, breathing in rhythm with the tides. Inside, the throne of Poseidon is carved from a single block of gleaming coral, its surface polished smooth and laid with gold and pearls. From this seat, the god surveys his endless realm, a king not of land but of boundless waters. Beside Poseidon sits Amphitrite, his queen, the quiet balance to his storm. Once reluctant to wed the god, she fled across the sea until the dolphin Delphinus brought her back. For this service, the dolphin was placed among the stars as a constellation, a reminder of the union it secured. Amphitrite is no mere shadow of Poseidon. She is the spirit of calm waters, the hush that follows the storm, the shimmering beauty of a quiet bay. Her presence softens the throne room, lending grace to the coral halls. With her, the palace becomes not only a place of power, but of harmony. Together they embody the sea's two faces, Poseidon, the roaring wave, Amphitrite, the gentle tide. No king rules alone. Poseidon's court is filled with deities, spirits and guardians, each embodying some facet of the ocean's mystery. Nereus, the wise old man of the sea, dwells nearby, a prophet whose voice echoes with ancient truth. The Nereids, 50 daughters of Nereus, attend Amphitrite. They swim like silver through the palace halls, their laughter bright as sunlight upon water. Each embodies a different aspect of the sea. Galatea of the milk-white waves, Psamathe of the sandy shore, Thetis of the shifting currents. Triton, son of Poseidon and Amphitrite, patrols the borders of the realm, his conch-shell trumpet able to still storms or summon them. Half man, half fish, he is the herald of the sea, carrying his father's will to the surface world. Spirits of rivers and streams, naiads and nereids, drift in and out, for all waters flow eventually into Poseidon's domain. The court is not one of silence. It hums with constant life, the whisper of kelp swaying like banners, the chatter of dolphins in the distance, the creak of the ocean floor shifting with unseen power. Mortals told tales of monsters dwelling in the deep, the kraken, Scylla, Charybdis, and many were said to serve Poseidon. Yet in truth, to the Greeks, such creatures were as natural to the sea as wolves to the forest. They were guardians, terrors to mortals, but subjects to their king. Scylla, with her snapping jaws, lurked in narrow straits, driving sailors into terror. Charybdis, the great whirlpool, swallowed ships whole, her gullet a dark abyss. To mortals they were doom, to Poseidon they were loyal daughters of the sea. Schools of fish moved like armies, obeying unseen signals. Whales, vast and ancient, sang hymns that resonated through the palace halls. Even the sharks, with their cold eyes, circled as sentinels of the god's power. All belonged. All were bound in the endless rhythm of tide and current. Yet the truest part of Poseidon's kingdom is not its palace, nor its creatures, but its silence. For deep below, in the trenches where light never reaches, lies a stillness that no storm can touch. It is a silence so complete that it feels eternal, pressing upon the soul like the weight of time itself. This too belongs to Poseidon. For the sea is not only motion and noise, it is also vast emptiness, patient and watchful. In that silence, Poseidon's power is absolute. He is the unseen force that holds the world together, the quiet reminder that beneath the surface lies infinity. Thus begins our descent into Poseidon's kingdom, a palace of coral and pearl, a court alive with gods and monsters, a realm vast beyond imagining. Here we see not only the god of storms, but the king of an endless empire, seated upon a throne carved from the heart of the sea. In the next part, we shall wander further through this kingdom, into the rituals of his court, the journeys of Triton, the alliances with sea-born nymphs, and the ways mortals imagine the ocean's mysteries reflected in their own world. The kingdom of Poseidon was not still. It pulsed with rhythms as sure as the tides, each moment echoing through the coral halls and kelp-draped avenues of the sea. Though mortals feared the vast unknown beneath the waves, to those who lived within it, the deep was a place of constant motion, ritual, and harmony. In the upper world, mortals marked time by the rising and setting sun. But in Poseidon's realm, time was measured differently. The sea had its own clock. The ebb and flow of tides, dictated by the pull of moon and trident alike. The migrations of creatures, vast schools moving like clouds through the depths. The songs of whales, carrying across leagues like bells tolling the hours of the deep. The palace thrummed with these rhythms. When the tide turned, ceremonies were held. When the whales sang, processions flowed through coral streets. When storms brewed above, the whole realm seemed to stir in sympathy, sensing the god's rising will. Among the many figures of Poseidon's court, none was as important as Triton, his son and herald. With his conch-shell trumpet, he could calm the fiercest gale or summon a tempest that shook fleets apart. Triton was not only a messenger to mortals, appearing on rocky shores with salt in his hair, but also a commander within the sea. He patrolled the borders of his father's realm, ensuring that no intruder, mortal, divine, or monstrous, disturbed the harmony of the deep. When he blew his horn, the sound rolled like thunder through the water, felt more than heard. It carried not just across the sea, but into the dreams of sailors, who awoke with dread, sensing the nearness of the god's hand. Around Amphitrite, the queen, gathered the Nereids, 50 daughters of Nereus, each a shining spirit of the sea. They were not merely attendants, they were voices of the ocean, each representing a current, a wave, a shore. They danced in the palace halls, their movements fluid as streams, their laughter light as foam. When mortals glimpsed figures beneath the surface, rising and vanishing with the spray, it was said to be the Nereids at play. Some, like Thetis, would shape the fate of heroes, guiding Achilles toward glory. Others, like Galatea, would inspire songs of love and longing. But all together, they were the chorus of the sea, weaving beauty into its endless expanse. Though mortals celebrated Poseidon in stone temples, beneath the waves the sea itself was temple enough. Ceremonies were held when the moon was full, when tides rose high, when storms churned the surface. The sea creatures gathered, dolphins leaping, whales circling, fish darting in patterns that mirrored constellations above. The Nereids sang hymns, voices mingling with the cries of gulls overhead, carried down into the water. Amphitrite offered garlands of sea flowers, glowing like fire in the darkness. Triton blew his conch, and the sound made the very currents tremble. At the center, Poseidon raised his trident, and with a single gesture, calm returned as if the sea itself bowed in reverence. Far above, mortals sometimes swore they could hear the sea whispering. Fishermen resting in their boats at night spoke of voices rising from beneath, soft as lullabies. Sailors crossing dangerous straits felt the pull of unseen hands guiding or resisting their progress. To the Greeks, these were not dreams but glimpses of Poseidon's kingdom. They believed the sea was alive with gods and spirits, and that every ripple upon its surface was the echo of their movements below. When sacrifices were made, bulls drowned in the surf, horses driven into the waves, it was said the offerings descended into the palace itself, seen by the Nereids, accepted by the king of tides. Among the strangest wonders of Poseidon's realm was what poets later called the Library of Currents. It was no library of books or scrolls, for such things belonged to fire and ink. Instead, it was a place where the ocean itself stored memory. Currents flowed through hidden caverns, carrying with them whispers of the surface world. Words spoken upon shores, the crash of storms, the songs of sailors. In the stillness of the deep, these sounds lingered, preserved in the eternal motion of water. Nereus, the old man of the sea, was said to listen there, drawing forth prophecy from the echoes. Poseidon himself visited when he wished to remember, not as mortals remember but as the sea does, without beginning, without end, without forgetting. Poseidon's throne stood at the heart of this kingdom, more than just a seat of power. It was a symbol of dominion, carved from coral that had grown over centuries, strengthened by layers of gold pulled from shipwrecks, adorned with pearls as large as apples. When he sat upon it, trident in hand, all the sea bent to his will. Whales turned their course. Currents shifted. Even the earth itself seemed to tremble, for the god who ruled the waves also bore the title Earth Shaker, master of quakes that split mountains and shattered cities. The throne room glowed with the soft light of bioluminescent creatures, drifting like stars in the water. It was a palace, yes, but also a cosmos, reflecting in its silence and its shimmer the boundless nature of Poseidon's realm. Thus the kingdom beneath the waves revealed itself not as chaos, but as harmony. From Triton's trumpet to the Nereids' dances, from sacrifices drifting down to offerings of coral and shell, the sea was alive with order and ritual. And at its heart, Poseidon reigned, not as tyrant, but as the living embodiment of the ocean itself. In the next part, we will journey deeper still, into the myths of monsters and guardians, into the hidden wonders of the trenches, into the ways mortals both feared and loved the mysteries of the sea. The sea is a realm of wonder but also of terror. To mortals, its surface shimmered with beauty, but its depths loomed dark and endless. And in those depths lived beings beyond imagination, guardians, monsters, and spirits who served Poseidon, obeying the will of the trident. To tell the story of his kingdom, we must turn to these creatures, for they were as much a part of his dominion as the currents and the tides. Few dangers were as feared as Scylla and Charybdis, twin terrors that haunted a narrow strait. Scylla was once said to be a maiden, beautiful and kind, beloved by the sea. But she was transformed, some say by Circe's jealousy, others by Poseidon's wrath. Her body sprouted 6 monstrous heads, each lined with triple rows of teeth, and from her waist writhed snapping dogs. She clung to the cliffs, snatching sailors from their decks, dragging them screaming into the deep. Opposite her lay Charybdis, a living whirlpool, daughter of Poseidon and Gaia. Thrice a day she swallowed the sea, drawing ships down into her cavernous maw, only to belch it forth again in waves that shattered timbers. Together they made passage nearly impossible. Sailors clung to one shore, fearing the other, knowing that to avoid one meant nearing the other. In them, mortals saw the essence of the sea itself: danger without mercy, choice without safety. And yet, in the myths, they are also loyal to Poseidon, serving as his guardians of the narrow straits. Though not a Greek invention, later sailors spoke of the kraken, a beast vast enough to drag entire ships beneath the waves. Its tentacles writhed like forests of flesh, its eyes glowed from the depths like suns. To the Greeks, such creatures were woven into Poseidon's realm, symbols of the sea's unknowable might. They imagined him summoning such a beast with a flick of his trident, sending it to crush arrogant kings who dared claim dominion over waters that were not theirs. The kraken, whether myth or memory of giant squids glimpsed in fleeting moments, became part of the sea god's legend, proof that in his domain, there was always something greater lurking unseen. Not all of Poseidon's creatures were monstrous. Some were wondrous, beings of beauty and speed. The hippocamps, half horse, half fish, who drew his chariot across the waves. Their manes streamed like sea foam, their scales gleamed like emeralds. When Poseidon rode forth, the ocean parted, dolphins leaping alongside, hippocamps neighing as though thunder echoed beneath the waves. To mortals who caught glimpses of this sight, a chariot racing the horizon, pulled by creatures no net could catch, it was a vision both terrifying and magnificent. The hippocamps were symbols of Poseidon's dual gifts: the horse, master of land, and the wave, master of sea, bound into a single form. Deeper still, in places no mortal could ever reach, Poseidon kept guardians of the trenches. These were beings less spoken of in myth, for few could imagine them. They were said to be shaped from darkness itself, with eyes that glowed like molten gold, with bodies vast and silent, moving unseen through the abyss. Some poets whispered that these guardians were the true keepers of the sea's secrets. They watched over wrecks of lost ships, treasures swallowed by storms, and even the bones of heroes. They were Poseidon's watchers, ensuring that the deep remained his alone. Not all who served Poseidon brought terror. Some brought beauty so sharp it cut like a blade. The sirens, with voices sweet as honey, sat upon rocky shores, singing songs that drew sailors to their doom. Though often linked to the Muses, their domain was also the sea, and thus Poseidon's kingdom claimed them. Their melodies carried across waves, promising home, love, glory, whatever a sailor's heart most longed for. But the closer men drew, the sharper the rocks, until ships splintered and the waves drank the crew. To the Greeks, the sirens were warnings. Beauty can be fatal, longing can destroy, and the sea is both song and silence, promise and betrayal. Every storm claimed its victims. Yet in the myths, wrecks were not seen as accidents alone. They were offerings swallowed by Poseidon, taken into his palace beneath the waves. Shattered timbers became part of coral halls. Golden coins sank into trenches, shining like stars in the dark. Weapons, shields, and statues drifted down, settling among the sea grass. To mortals these were losses. To Poseidon they were tributes, building his kingdom's wealth without end. Thus, even tragedy became part of his glory. Every lost ship was a reminder that the sea does not yield, that mortals sail always at the mercy of the god beneath. At the heart of all these creatures, monsters, and offerings, lay a single truth: Poseidon's kingdom was endless. No matter how far a sailor traveled, no matter how deep a diver sank, the sea stretched farther still. In this infinity, Poseidon was not merely king. He was presence itself. His trident pointed not only toward power, but toward the eternal truth of the ocean. It cannot be tamed, cannot be owned, cannot be ended. To worship Poseidon was to acknowledge this truth. To defy him was to risk becoming yet another story whispered in the currents, yet another shipwreck glowing faintly in the coral halls of his palace. Thus the creatures and guardians of Poseidon's realm remind us, the sea is not empty but alive. It holds terror and wonder, monsters and marvels, ruin and beauty. And at its center sits the god himself, calm as the eye of a storm, watching as his kingdom flows forever onward. In the next and final part of this chapter, we will explore how Poseidon's realm touches the world above, how mortals prayed to him, how heroes crossed his waters, how empires rose and fell by his will, and how the sea became both cradle and grave of nations. When mortals gazed upon the ocean, they saw beauty, but they also saw hunger. The horizon called them outward, promising wealth, lands, and glory. Yet every voyage began with a prayer to Poseidon, for without his blessing no ship, no fleet, no sailor could hope to return. Before ships departed, captains poured wine into the waves, letting the sea drink. Some cast in coins of silver or gold, tokens meant to appease the god's temper. Fishermen left the first catch upon the shore, a gift to ensure the next day's nets would not return empty. Even kings, before launching fleets, sacrificed bulls, their bodies cast into the sea, crimson blood clouding the surf. For Poseidon demanded respect. Not cruelty, not greed, but acknowledgement. The sea could not be taken. It could only be borrowed, always returned in tribute. Every sailor carried words for Poseidon, whispered as the sails unfurled. Some prayed for calm winds, others for swift journeys, others still for storms to fall upon their enemies. These prayers were small, fragile things, yet Poseidon heard them. Sometimes he granted them, guiding ships gently to shore. Other times he let silence answer, reminding mortals that the sea was not theirs to command. To pray to Poseidon was to speak into the infinite, a voice cast into a vastness where it might be heard, or it might be swallowed forever. The ocean was not merely a path but a test. Sailors knew that arrogance led to ruin, that cruelty angered the waves, that hubris drew storms. The sea judged not with words but with consequence. A humble sailor, respectful of the waves, might find unexpected calm even when storms raged nearby. But a tyrant, boastful and proud, might see his fleet vanish beneath a sudden squall. In this way Poseidon was more than a god. He was balance, a force ensuring that no man, however mighty, escaped the reminder of his limits. No empire rose without the sea. Greece itself was bound by water, its cities scattered along coasts, its power carried on ships. Poseidon's realm was their lifeblood, yet also their greatest threat. The Athenians built their fleet and prayed before every voyage. The Spartans, though warriors of land, still bowed to the waves before crossing. To control the sea was to seek Poseidon's favor. To lose it was to taste his wrath. Battles were fought not only with spears but with storms. When fleets met, it was not merely men clashing. It was Poseidon himself who watched, deciding who would sink, who would drift home in victory. No tale of Greek heroes was free of Poseidon's touch. Odysseus wandered for years across the waves, punished by the sea god's anger. Jason and the Argonauts sailed under his watchful gaze, their success as much a matter of Poseidon's will as of their courage. For every hero who braved the sea there was a prayer, a story, a sacrifice. Poseidon was not a passive god in these tales. He was the stage itself, the current that bore them, the storm that tested them, the silence that judged them. In the myths, storms were not random. They were signs, prophecies written in wind and wave. A storm at dawn might mean a warning. A storm at dusk, a challenge. And when the skies split with thunder and the sea rose to swallow ships, mortals did not blame chance. They looked to Poseidon, knowing the god had spoken. In this way storms became more than weather. They became language, divine words written upon the horizon. To understand them was to glimpse the will of the god himself. Ships returned or they did not. Fishermen came home with nets full or with silence. Empires rose on trade, only to crumble when storms claimed their fleets. Through it all, Poseidon remained. The sea took and the sea gave. It swallowed men whole and it delivered them safely. It wrecked cities and it blessed harbors. Always it reminded mortals that life was not theirs alone, but shared with the God who dwelled beneath the waves. At last we return to the image of Poseidon himself. Imagine him, seated upon a throne of coral and pearl, trident in hand, crown of seashells upon his brow. His eyes are as deep as the abyss, his beard tangled with seaweed, his body strong as the tides. Around him swirl dolphins, hippocamps, sirens and guardians of the trenches. In his halls lie treasures of 1,000 shipwrecks, gleaming faintly in the light of glowing coral. From his throne he does not rage, he simply is as eternal as the sea itself. And so long as waves touch the shore, so long as storms split the horizon, so long as mortals sail into the unknown, Poseidon remains watching. The kingdom beneath the waves is not silence, nor emptiness, nor void. It is life, endless and ever-changing, ruled by a god who embodies the sea's gifts and its terrors. Poseidon is not merely the god of water. He is the sea itself. And to tell of him is to tell of the waves, the storms, the monsters, the wonders, and the endless horizon that forever calls to mortals and gods alike. The sea is not always gentle. It can cradle ships in soft waves, guiding them homeward with a steady rhythm, like a mother rocking a child to sleep. But in an instant, it can also rise in fury, a towering wall of water crashing down with the force of the gods themselves. This duality, the calm and the storm, the gift and the punishment, is the essence of Poseidon. To understand him fully, we must see him not only as the ruler of waves and currents, but as the living embodiment of balance, the bringer of destruction and the giver of mercy. When Poseidon's anger stirred, mortals trembled. His wrath was unlike that of any other god. Zeus struck with thunderbolts sudden and final. Hades ruled with silence, inevitable and absolute. But Poseidon's anger was drawn out, relentless. A storm could last not hours but days. Winds tore at sails, rain stung like lashes, and the sea itself rose to swallow ships whole. Sailors clung to wood, prayed desperately, and cried out to the god whose voice roared in the crashing waves. This wrath was not petty. It was not a whim. It was a response to insult, disrespect, or betrayal. Mortals who ignored his offerings, kings who boasted of power greater than his, heroes who forgot the sea's sovereignty, all of these drew Poseidon's fury. And when it came, there was no mistaking it. No story shows Poseidon's wrath more vividly than the long wanderings of Odysseus. After the fall of Troy, Odysseus set sail for his homeland of Ithaca. He was clever, resourceful, a man favored by Athena. But Poseidon saw in him arrogance, a mortal who dared to blind his son, the Cyclops Polyphemus, and who boasted of his own wit as though no god had guided him. Poseidon's anger was not swift, but enduring. He stretched Odysseus's voyage not into weeks, nor months, but 10 long years. Storm after storm struck his fleet. Winds scattered his men across distant islands. Each time Odysseus thought he had reached home, the sea betrayed him, pulling him farther from his goal. Imagine the loneliness of that journey, the endless horizon, the salt upon the lips, the sound of waves crashing relentlessly. Imagine the fear of a sailor who sees his homeland just ahead, only to watch as the sea rises once more to drag him away. This was Poseidon's wrath, not a single blow, but a lesson that endured, carved into the heart of a mortal. And yet, in the end, even Odysseus was allowed to return. For Poseidon's fury, though vast, was not eternal. For as much as Poseidon punished, he also forgave. His mercy came quietly, like calm after a storm. A shipwrecked sailor might find himself clinging to driftwood, tossed upon the waves for days. Just as despair weighed upon him, the current might carry him to a soft shore. A fisherman lost in fog might suddenly feel the wind shift, carrying him homeward. These small mercies were Poseidon's gifts, unspoken but deeply felt. They reminded mortals that the sea was not only danger, but salvation. It could take life, but it could also give it. And those who received mercy often became his most devoted followers, building shrines upon the coasts, whispering prayers each dawn, pouring libations into the tide. Mortals feared Poseidon's temper more than that of any other god, for it was not confined to individuals. His wrath could strike entire kingdoms. When King Minos of Crete once promised to sacrifice a bull to Poseidon but failed to do so, keeping the animal for himself, the god's anger was swift. He caused the queen, Pasiphae, to fall in unnatural love with the bull. From their union was born the Minotaur, a creature of darkness that haunted Crete for generations. This story shows how Poseidon's wrath was not always destruction by storm. Sometimes it was subtler, woven into fate itself. His punishments could last years, shaping dynasties, bending histories. Though he was god of the sea, Poseidon's power reached beyond the waves. With a strike of his trident, he could shatter cliffs, open springs, or bring earthquakes that shook the earth to its foundations. The Greeks called him Enosikthon, the earth shaker. Cities feared his tread, for when he walked, the ground itself trembled. Temples collapsed, mountains cracked, and rivers shifted their paths. This power reminded mortals that Poseidon's wrath was not bound to the sea alone. The very earth they walked upon could betray them if the god willed it. Yet Poseidon's mercy was as important as his wrath. Just as storms broke ships, calm seas carried them home. Just as earthquakes shattered cities, springs of fresh water gave them life. He was not a god of cruelty. He was a god of balance. His punishments taught humility. His mercies offered hope. In his dual nature, mortals saw the reflection of life itself. Struggle and relief, suffering and joy, wrath and forgiveness. And so, when they prayed to him, they did not only beg for protection. They gave thanks for his mercies, knowing that without him, there would be no journeys, no fish, no trade, no life upon the shores. For mortals, the sea was a school and Poseidon the teacher. His wrath warned them against arrogance. His mercy taught them gratitude. His storms reminded them of their limits, and his calm reminded them of the gifts of the gods. Every voyage was a lesson, every storm a test, every return a blessing. Through Poseidon's dual nature, mortals learned not only to fear but to respect. And so his stories endured, whispered by sailors upon the decks of ships, told by fishermen at dawn, written in salt, wave and wind. In these tales of wrath and mercy, Poseidon stands revealed as more than a god of water. He is the embodiment of balance, the reminder that all things, even life itself, flow between storm and calm. But to understand his nature fully, we must dive deeper into the myths that show how mortals encountered his anger and his forgiveness. For each story, whether of king or sailor, reveals not just punishment or gift, but the enduring lesson of the sea. And so, the waves rise again, carrying us into the next part of this chapter. The sea is vast, infinite in its moods. It does not simply shift from calm to storm as mortals imagine. Instead, it carries endless shades of change, the soft swell of a summer tide, the restless churning of winter waters, the sudden squall that rises like a beast from beneath the horizon. In these changes, mortals saw not only weather but the very heart of Poseidon. His anger was not always fire and thunder. Sometimes it was quiet, disguised as delay, disappointment, or loss. His mercy was not always clear skies, but the faint chance of survival, the unexpected glimpse of hope in darkness. There was once a time when a great city sought a patron god. Its people, eager to prosper, built a council to decide which deity would best protect and bless them. Two gods came forward, Athena, the goddess of wisdom, and Poseidon, lord of the sea. To prove their worth, each offered a gift. Poseidon struck the earth with his trident, and from the rock sprang a great spring of water. The people cheered, for it promised life and wealth. But when they tasted the water, they found it salty, as bitter as the sea itself. Then Athena stepped forward. She planted a seed into the soil, and from it grew the olive tree, strong, evergreen, and abundant with fruit. Its oil promised food, trade, and light for lamps. The people chose Athena. The city became Athens, not Poseidonia. This choice wounded Poseidon's pride. His wrath rose like a storm. He flooded the plains around the city, sending waves crashing against its fields, destroying crops. 4 years afterward, Athenians knew that though Athena was their protector, Poseidon's anger lingered. Every drought, every flood, every storm at sea was a reminder that they had chosen one god's favor at the cost of another's peace. And yet, even in his fury, Poseidon did not destroy the city. He allowed it to stand, to grow, to thrive. His wrath was not endless. His mercy allowed Athens to rise. This tale became a warning that even in victory, mortals must respect the gods they do not choose. Another story tells of King Minos, ruler of Crete. Minos prayed to Poseidon for a sign to prove his right to rule. The god sent him a magnificent white bull, shining with divine beauty. Minos was meant to sacrifice it in gratitude. But greed stirred in the king's heart. He kept the bull for himself, offering a lesser one in its place. Poseidon's wrath was swift and terrible. He caused the queen, Pasiphae, to fall into unnatural love with the bull. From this union was born the Minotaur, half man, half beast, a creature of darkness that haunted Crete for generations. Poseidon did not strike with a storm this time. His punishment was subtler, woven into the lives of mortals, shaping destinies long after the moment of betrayal. Minos's greed did not only curse himself, it cursed his descendants, his kingdom, and all who crossed paths with the beast in the labyrinth. And yet, when Theseus, guided by courage and the wisdom of Ariadne, slew the Minotaur, Poseidon's wrath was appeased. The cycle of punishment ended. Mercy once more balanced anger. The tale of Odysseus deserves deeper telling, For no story shows better the endurance of Poseidon's wrath and the glimmers of mercy hidden within it. When Odysseus blinded Polyphemus, the Cyclops cried out to his father. Poseidon heard, and his fury grew. From that moment, every wave, every gust of wind, every delay on Odysseus's journey bore the weight of divine vengeance. For 10 years he wandered. On the island of Ae, he lingered with Circe. On Ogygia he was trapped with the nymph Calypso. Storms cast him upon the land of the Lotus Eaters, where his men nearly forgot their homeland. Each island was both a trial and a delay, each a chain dragging him farther from Ithaca. And yet Poseidon did not kill Odysseus. He allowed him to live, to learn, to suffer. His wrath was not annihilation, but education. Odysseus, the clever trickster, learned humility. He learned endurance. He learned patience. When at last he washed ashore in Phaeacia, broken and weary, the people offered him kindness. They listened to his story, they wept at his suffering, and they gave him a ship to return home. Even then Poseidon struck once more, turning the vessel to stone as it entered Ithaca's harbor, a final reminder of his anger. But Odysseus at last stepped upon his homeland. The lesson was complete. Wrath gave way to mercy. The war at Troy showed another side of Poseidon's nature. Though he favored the Greeks, he was also protector of walls. Long before the war, he and Apollo had been forced by Zeus to serve King Laomedon of Troy. Together they built the city's mighty walls, strong and impenetrable. When Laomedon refused to pay them, Poseidon cursed him. He sent a sea monster to ravage the Trojan coast, demanding the sacrifice of the king's daughter, Hesione. Her life was spared only by the hero Heracles, who slew the beast. Years later, when the Greeks sailed to Troy, Poseidon's anger against the city remained. He aided the Greeks, shaking the earth beneath the Trojans' feet, filling their hearts with terror. Yet even then his fury was measured. He did not destroy the city with a single wave. He allowed fate to unfold, step by step, until the walls he had once built crumbled. His wrath was real, but so was his patience. The greatest sin in Poseidon's eyes was hubris, arrogance, the mortal belief that they could defy or surpass the gods. When Ajax the Lesser, a warrior of Greece, defiled the temple of Athena by dragging Cassandra from its altar, Poseidon's anger blazed. As Ajax sailed home, Poseidon struck his ship with a storm, splitting it apart. The sea swallowed him, dragging him to the depths. Here there was no mercy. His crime had been unforgivable, his arrogance beyond redemption. In this, mortals learned that Poseidon's mercy was not unconditional. Respect the gods and you may be forgiven. Defy them utterly and the sea itself will claim you. Yet not all tales are of wrath. Poseidon was also giver of blessings. In many places he struck the earth with his trident, not to punish but to provide. Springs of fresh water burst forth, quenching thirst, feeding fields, blessing cities. To farmers, these springs were proof of his kindness. To shepherds, they were signs of his protection. Not every strike of the trident shattered, some gave life. In this, mortals saw his mercy, unexpected, generous, eternal. These stories remind us that Poseidon was never one thing alone. He was not only storm nor only calm. He was both. His wrath taught fear, his mercy taught gratitude, and together they formed the balance of his rule. Mortals lived by this balance. Sailors knew that every voyage might end in storm, but they sailed anyway, trusting in his mercy. Farmers knew that every earthquake might shatter their fields, but they tilled anyway, grateful for his springs. In Poseidon they saw life itself, uncertain, dangerous, beautiful, and full of hope. But to truly grasp the depth of Poseidon's nature, we must look beyond kings and sailors. His wrath and mercy shaped not only men but heroes, dynasties, and entire ages of myth. His hand guided wars, shaped destinies, and tested the greatest mortals of Greece. In the next part we will dive deeper into these legends, Theseus and the labyrinth, the wrath of storms against arrogant fleets, the mercy shown to those who honored him. For every story, whether of disaster or deliverance, whispers the same truth, that the sea, like its god, is eternal balance. The sea is patient. It waits. It watches. To mortals it may seem still, but beneath the surface currents churn, shaping the world in ways unseen. So it was with Poseidon's will. His wrath and mercy did not always strike like lightning, sudden and absolute. Sometimes they unfolded like the slow turning of the tide, subtle yet inevitable. In this part of his story, we see how Poseidon touched the lives of heroes, shaping their destinies with storms, gifts, and trials. His hand guided not only kings and sailors, but those who would be remembered for centuries in myth and song. Theseus, the hero of Athens, was tied to Poseidon not only by blood but by fate. Some stories claim that his true father was Aegeus, king of Athens. Others whispered that Poseidon himself had lain with Aethra, Theseus's mother, making the hero a son of the sea. Whether mortal or divine in parentage, Theseus bore Poseidon's mark. His strength, his courage, his unshakable will, all these reflected the god's essence. When he set forth to Crete to face the Minotaur, the sea carried him. His sails, black and somber, caught the winds Poseidon provided. The waves bore him to Knossos, where he entered the labyrinth. There he slew the beast born of Poseidon's earlier wrath, the Minotaur, punishment for King Minos's betrayal. This act was not only a triumph of mortal bravery but also a quiet resolution of the god's vengeance. Poseidon had sent the curse. Theseus had ended it. Through the son of Athens the balance was restored. And yet the sea's role did not end there. When Theseus returned, he forgot to change his sails from black to white, a signal agreed upon with his father. Seeing the black sails, Aegeus believed his son dead and cast himself into the sea. That body of water would forever bear his name, the Aegean. Thus, the sea both carried Theseus to glory and claimed the life of his father. Wrath and mercy intertwined once more. Not all heroes honored Poseidon. Some defied him, daring to reach higher than their place allowed. Among these were the Elodi, twin giants named Attis and Ephialtes. They were sons of Poseidon, born of mortal mothers, and in their youth they grew to enormous size, their strength unmatched. But instead of gratitude they turned to arrogance. They sought to storm Olympus itself, piling mountain upon mountain to reach the gods. This hubris could not be tolerated. Though Poseidon was their father, he did not shield them from fate. The twins were slain, struck down before their rebellion could rise. Their story became a lesson whispered among sailors and kings alike. Even the children of Poseidon could not escape his judgment if they defied the order of the cosmos. Poseidon's hand lay heavy upon Troy, not only during the war but in its very foundations. When he and Apollo built the walls of the city, they expected honor, payment, and respect. Laomedon, king of Troy, denied them, mocking the gods. Poseidon's wrath did not fall immediately. Instead, it grew patient as the sea. He sent the monster that ravaged the coast. He sent storms against Trojan ships. And when the Greeks marched upon Troy, Poseidon lent his strength to their cause. The sea played its part in the war. Ships carried warriors across the waves, storms delayed fleets, tides shifted battles. All of these movements bore Poseidon's will, silent yet undeniable. When Troy fell, it was not only Athena's cunning or Zeus's decrees, it was the weight of Poseidon's lingering wrath. Not all heroes suffered under Poseidon's hand. Some received his favor, his mercy. Among these was the great hero Perseus. When Perseus set out to slay Medusa, he crossed waters watched by Poseidon. The sea god allowed him safe passage, guiding his ship, steadying his oars. Perhaps this was because Medusa, once a maiden, had been cursed within Poseidon's own temple. Her story was entangled with his own power. For Perseus, the sea became not an enemy but a pathway, smooth and merciful. His success, his return, his triumph over the Gorgon, all these bore Poseidon's silent blessing. Beyond the waves, Poseidon's wrath took form in earthquakes. Entire cities trembled at his tread. When men grew arrogant, when kings denied the gods, Poseidon shook the ground beneath them. Walls cracked, temples fell, fields split apart. These earthquakes were more than destruction. They were warnings. Just as a storm warned sailors of their fragility, an earthquake reminded mortals that even the ground they trusted could betray them. Nothing was secure, nothing beyond the reach of the god. And yet, after the shaking ceased, the earth grew fertile again. Crops sprouted in cracks, springs opened, rivers shifted to nourish new lands. Wrath gave way to renewal, mercy following destruction like calm after a storm. In coastal villages, sailors sang hymns to Poseidon before each voyage. Their voices rose like waves, low and steady, carried on the wind. The words were simple. Lord of the deep, master of waves, guide our ships, forgive our sins. Spare us your storm, grant us your calm, that we may return to the arms of home. These songs were not grand temples or golden offerings. They were small human acts of faith. Poseidon heard them. Sometimes he answered with mercy, carrying the ships gently to harbor. Other times he answered with silence, letting the storm decide. In every story of heroes, Poseidon's hand is seen. Theseus, Ajax, Odysseus, Perseus, each bore his wrath or mercy. None escaped his reach. Through them, mortals learned that the sea was not only a path or a battlefield. It was a mirror of life itself, harsh, generous, cruel, kind. To live was to walk the line between storm and calm, just as Poseidon ruled both. We have seen Poseidon's wrath upon cities, his mercy upon heroes, his balance shaping the fates of men and gods alike. But the sea is endless, and so too are the tales. In the final part of this chapter, we will draw these threads together. We will see how mortals remembered him, how they built temples and shrines, how they whispered his name in fear and gratitude. And we will understand at last that Poseidon's wrath and mercy are not opposites, but parts of one eternal truth, that the sea, like life, demands respect. The sea has no end. Stand upon a cliff at dawn, look out across the horizon, and you will see nothing but blue upon blue, wave upon wave, stretching farther than sight itself. It is here, in this infinity, that Poseidon reigns, the Lord of wrath and mercy, the god whose hand can raise storms or soothe the waters into glass. To mortals, this duality was not theory but daily truth. They felt it in every tide, every voyage, every storm cloud rising on the horizon. And so they sought to honor him, to remember his power, and to beg his forgiveness when his anger fell upon them. Across Greece, shrines and temples to Poseidon stood upon cliffs, capes and islands, where sea met land. At Cape Saunion, his temple rose high above the waves, marble columns gleaming in the sunlight. Sailors returning from long voyages could see it from miles away, a beacon of safety and reverence. They believed that within those sacred stones, Poseidon's gaze lingered, watching both the shore and the horizon. Offerings filled these temples, gold, silver, and precious oils. Fishermen laid nets at his altar, kings sacrificed bulls, and humble sailors lit simple lamps. Each act, whether great or small, was the same, a plea for mercy, a gesture of respect. The Greeks knew that Poseidon was not only to be asked for calm seas. His wrath too had to be acknowledged. At festivals, priests poured wine into the surf, calling his name not only as a protector but as a judge. Lord of the deep, they cried, remember us not with anger. Spare our ships. Hold your storms. Walk gently upon the earth. At times these rituals were desperate. After earthquakes, entire cities gathered to appease him, offering sacrifices, rebuilding temples, promising devotion. For when the earth shook, they knew the earth-shaker had passed by. But just as often, rituals were quiet, simple. A fisherman's child tossing flowers into the tide. A widow pouring oil into the waves for her husband lost at sea. In these small acts, Poseidon's mercy was sought not with grandeur, but with humility. For sailors, Poseidon was never distant. He was not only a god upon Olympus, seated among the immortals. He was in the very waves beneath their ships, the wind in their sails, the currents pulling their oars. They told stories of him during long nights at sea. By torchlight, as ships rocked gently, they whispered of storms survived, of waves taller than mountains, of moments when all seemed lost until the sea calmed, sudden and strange. Some swore they had seen him, rising from the depths with trident in hand, hair dripping with foam, eyes glowing with the light of the abyss. Others spoke of dolphins guiding their ships, or sudden shoals of fish appearing when hunger threatened. Whether wrath or mercy, every tale was Poseidon. Mortals came to understand that Poseidon's wrath was not cruelty but instruction. A storm that shattered ships reminded them that no man was master of the sea. An earthquake that split the earth warned kings not to grow arrogant. A curse upon a kingdom taught rulers the cost of betrayal. His anger was a mirror held up to human pride, showing them their limits. And though it was terrible, it was never mindless. It always carried meaning, a lesson hidden in the roar of the waves. Just as wrath taught fear, mercy taught gratitude. Calm seas at dawn, rich nets of fish, safe harbors after long voyages, all these were Poseidon's gifts. Mercy did not come with trumpet or lightning. It came in silence, in the soft rocking of a ship upon still waters, in the sudden break of a storm to reveal a golden sky. Mortals felt his hand not in grandeur but in gentleness. And so they gave thanks. Every safe return was an answered prayer. Every calm voyage was a mercy remembered in temples, songs, and whispered words before sleep. For the Greeks, Poseidon was more than a god. He was presence itself. The sea was never empty, never silent. It always carried his voice, whether in the crash of waves or the lull of tides. Farmers remembered him when the ground shook beneath their feet. Sailors remembered him when sails caught the wind. Kings remembered him when walls cracked, when dynasties crumbled, when storms swept across their coasts. His wrath was feared. His mercy was cherished. But both were loved because both were needed. In Poseidon's nature, mortals saw the truth of existence. Life itself was a balance of storm and calm, of wrath and mercy, of destruction and renewal. Every storm eventually ends. Every earthquake leaves behind fertile soil. Every punishment carries within it the seed of learning. And every act of mercy, however small, becomes a foundation for gratitude, hope, and life itself. Poseidon was not merely a destroyer. He was not merely a giver. He was both. He was the balance that held the world between extremes. And so, as the myths tell, Poseidon still watches. From his coral throne in the depths, trident in hand, he listens to the prayers of sailors, the cries of kings, the whispers of children upon the shore. He does not always answer. He does not always strike. But his presence is always felt, in every wave that laps against the sand, in every tide that rises, in every earthquake that shakes the world. Wrath and mercy are his language. The sea is his voice. Thus ends the tale of Poseidon's wrath and mercy. It is not the tale of cruelty or kindness alone, but of balance. His storms remind mortals of their fragility. His calm seas remind them of their blessings. His punishments shape their destinies. His mercies sustain their lives. To honor Poseidon is not only to beg for protection. It is to respect the balance he embodies, to live humbly within the rhythm of storm and calm. And so, when we look upon the sea, endless and eternal, we see not emptiness but the presence of the God who rules it. The roar of the surf, the crash of waves, the silence of dawn, all are Poseidon, wrathful and merciful forever. The waves never rest. They rise and fall, surge and retreat, forever shaping the coasts of the world. And within their rhythm, mortals have always heard the heartbeat of Poseidon, god of the deep, ruler of storms, keeper of the trident. Throughout the stories he has appeared in many forms: wrathful, merciful, jealous, generous, fierce, and protective. Yet above all, Poseidon has always been constant as the sea itself. To understand Poseidon is to understand balance. For he is not merely a god of destruction, nor merely a god of gifts. He is the storm and the calm, the earthquake and the fertile soil, the punishment and the blessing. Mortals feared him, yes. They feared his earthquakes that split mountains, his storms that swallowed ships whole, his curses that toppled kingdoms. But in equal measure they cherished him, giving thanks for calm seas, rich harvests from the deep, and safe voyages home. Poseidon was wrath when wrath was needed. Poseidon was mercy when mercy was just. In him, mortals saw not only the sea but the truth of life itself, that all things move between chaos and peace, storm and stillness, fury and grace. Though temples may crumble, though kingdoms may fall, Poseidon endures. For his temple is the sea itself, his altar the waves, his hymns the cries of gulls and the roar of surf upon stone. Every tide that rises is his gesture. Every storm that gathers is his voice. Every calm morning when the waters lie smooth as glass is his gift. Mortals need not seek him only in marble columns or gilded statues. He is everywhere. In the depths of oceans, in the rivers that carve through land, in the rain that falls upon the earth, in the tremors that remind men they walk upon shifting ground. Poseidon is presence itself. From Poseidon mortals learned humility. For no matter how great a city, how proud a king, how powerful an army, none could stand against the sea. No wall could hold back the tide forever. No ship could resist the storm unscathed. But Poseidon also taught endurance. For though storms rage, they always pass. Though ships sink, new voyages begin. Though the earth shakes, life rises again from the broken soil. In Poseidon's domain, mortals found both fear and hope, and in that paradox they found truth. On Olympus, Poseidon stood tall among his brothers. Zeus held the skies, Hades ruled the underworld, but Poseidon commanded the vastness in between, the endless seas that touched every shore. He was not always gentle with the other gods. He quarreled, defied, and resisted. Yet he was also indispensable, for the sea connected all lands, and nothing moved without his influence. The trident he held was not merely a weapon, it was the key to the balance of the world. Without Poseidon there was no voyage. Without Poseidon there was no storm to cleanse the earth. Without Poseidon, there was no sea to cradle the horizons of men. For sailors especially, Poseidon was not a distant god, but a constant companion. They prayed to him before setting sail. They offered to him at every safe landing. They whispered his name when storms raged and sang his praises when winds filled their sails. Some claim to have glimpsed him rising from the deep, a figure crowned with seaweed and foam, dolphins leaping at his side. Others spoke of voices in the waves, or visions of his trident glowing beneath the surf. Whether true or imagined, these stories revealed one truth. To sailors, Poseidon was never absent. He was always there, riding the waves beside them. Today, when we look out upon the sea, endless and eternal, we still see Poseidon. Not as a figure with beard and trident alone, but as the spirit of the waters themselves. The crash of surf upon cliffs, the deep hush of tides beneath the moon, the sparkling light upon morning waves, all are reminders of him. His wrath is still felt in storms and quakes. His mercy is still felt in calm harbors and rich fisheries. His legacy endures not in myth alone, but in every moment the sea touches our lives. For as long as waves rise and fall, Poseidon will never fade. Imagine now one final vision. The sea stretches out beneath a starlit sky, dark and vast, reflecting constellations like a mirror. The winds fall silent. The waves calm. Out of the depths rises a figure, tall, powerful, crowned with coral and pearls, eyes glowing like the abyss, trident in hand. It is Poseidon, lord of the oceans, master of storms, guardian of balance. He stands upon the waves, looking out across the horizon where sea meets sky. And as he lifts his trident, the waters rise, shimmering with power, then fall again into stillness. His voice is the voice of the tide, deep and resonant. I am the sea. I am the storm. I am the calm. As long as the waves endure, so shall I. And then he vanishes, swallowed by the deep. Only the ocean remains, endless and eternal, singing his name in every tide. So now, as this tale of Poseidon comes to its end, let the waves carry you into rest. Hear the rhythm of the sea in your breath, in, out, rising, falling. Feel the calm of the ocean's mercy, soothing and endless. For tonight, you sail not upon storm-tossed waters, but upon the quiet tides of sleep. And as you drift, remember, the god of the sea watches still, trident in hand, guarding both the living world and the dreams of those who close their eyes beneath his stars. Sleep well. Dream deeply. And may the sea of Poseidon carry you gently until morning,